I was never, ever a good loser. That being said, in the end, when the game is over, it's over.
Come Monday morning, I'm going to be, on my way back to Minnesota to law school. And Tuesday morning when I'm in class, I'm just going to be like everybody else sitting there in class.
The pro forma moping after the game, I think he thought was kind of silly. He rejected a lot of the trappings of stardom that came with his being a great football player. A friend of mine in grade school, his father managed the Holiday Inn at the airport where the Vikings stayed before home games. My friend's dad said, you can get anybody's autograph you want, but don't ask Alan Page. He doesn't sign autographs. And I was completely crushed. He would be happy to sit and talk to somebody for a few minutes and have a human exchange, but he didn't understand why getting somebody's signature meant anything.
Some thought defensive tackle Alan Page was more interested in studying law than creating new ways to dismantle sweeps. Number 88 would overrule such testimony.
Page's increased focus on his law studies further cast him adrift from the football player's stereotype.
He wanted to graduate from law school. Well, it's pretty hard to do that in football. And Alan was always in good shape. And so I said, Alan, you don't have to come to training camp. Go to school, get your law degree. That's more important than football will ever be to you. And so he did.
Alan earned his sheepskin around the same time he acquired a new hobby, long-distance running.
He runs every day, no matter how cold or how hot. I call him Old Faithful. I mean, it's cold. Like Minnesota winters can get -20. He's got all the gear and he heads out. His whole beard would just be an icicle.
My weight just started to melt away. Started running in 77. By the start of the next season, I was 224. I think initially they thought maybe I was sick, that something was wrong.
Bud just thought at that time that he was way too light and guys were holding him, they could push him around easier and all of that, and it didn't fit into what Bud wanted as a defensive lineman.
More problems surfaced after Buddy Ryan, Page's favorite coach, left the Vikings for Chicago. Ryan's replacement installed a new scheme that restrained Allen from what he did best.
They wanted somebody who could stand their ground in a particular spot, tried to figure out how to do what they wanted done to the best of my ability. Didn't work very well. That just didn't fit my skills. I said, given what we're trying to do here, I may never get another quarterback sack. Interestingly, in 78, while I was with the Vikings, I didn't get any.
I came home one day and the sports reporter from WCCO TV was on our doorstep. And he had heard that Alan had been waived. And we actually got the news because Bud had not called Alan yet. I was not very happy with the way Bud had treated Alan.
They didn't have the courage to speak to me face to face and tell me that I had been fired, or give me, ever to this day, give me a rationale for it.
If you watch the last two games, let's say he made one tackle in 2 games. Most of the time he's our leading tackler. We got to make those decisions every day. And you and I can't go on forever,
I think it had a little bit maybe to do with the union, the law school, the weight loss. Who do you think you are? You think you're too good for football? It was a particularly difficult time for us because Alan had just found out he had not passed the bar. We had 4 children at home. You don't have a team. You're unemployed.
There were some ugly, dark days. I tend to be pretty upbeat about things. I was pretty down.
Alan, assuming the worst happens and no one claims you and you become a free agent, would you actively seek employment with another NFL team?
Very definitely, and in fact, hopefully by the time that that this airs, I will be employed again.
It was tough, although, in the grand scheme of things, it didn't last very long because I got picked up by the Bears. I can remember walking down Michigan Avenue, and a CTA bus goes by and stops. bus driver opens the door and welcomes me to Chicago. And things just got better from there.
In 1978, Alan Page came to Chicago, given a new task by his old coach, Buddy Ryan.
I think Buddy trusted Alan. In a lot of ways, I think he molded Buddy's defense. He was a mentor and a role model to those younger players.
In 3.5 years with the Bears, Page led the team in sacks and led the fight to help Buddy Ryan keep his job, following a second straight losing season in 1981.
Buddy Ryan, as the defensive coordinator there, what that team accomplished was really pretty incredible. And so we talked about, as a team, as a defensive team, writing a letter to George Halas, and I took the liberty of drafting it and showing it to everybody.
We had all the defensive players sign it, that we thought that if we lost our defensive coordinator, we were a good defense, but we thought we could be a great defense.
You know, Alan Page is a special guy, and he knew what he had there, and that was when he was about done playing. So for him to do that, take that upon himself, that's really something.
George Halas actually came to one of our practices, and he said, "I got your letter, and your coaches will be back next year."
When Alan Page penned that letter to Mr. Halas, that spawned the best defense that ever played.
I'll tell you what, this defense has been incredible. Total decimation of the AFC champion New England Patriots.
Page capped his 15th and final NFL season with one of the greatest curtain calls in sports history.
It's been a great career. I've enjoyed every moment. And when I stop and think, it reminds me of a line from Tennyson's Ulysses. I am a part of all that I have met. Thank you.
How many defensive linemen are known to quote Tennyson?
I believe he's the only one probably ever.
They did have to win to get into the playoffs. We didn't have anything theoretically to play for. Just because it was the last game, there wasn't any reason to change my perspective. And so we went out and sent Denver home for the winter.
Would you believe Alan Page?
Ted Williams hit a home run in his final at-bat at Fenway Park, and to me, Page getting 3.5 sacks in his final game at Soldier Field was the equivalent of Ted Williams hitting a home run in his final at-bat.
After the long goodbyes and all that, walk out, meet Diane, and we walk to our car, and the players had lined up and sang Auld Lang Syne, and it brought me to tears. It brings me to tears now.
Page the athlete was now Page the attorney, serving in private practice and labor law for more than a decade. But his ultimate goal was to become a judge. Alan got his chance in 1992, hitting the campaign trail to run for a seat on Minnesota's Supreme Court. The politics were not always pretty.
Campaign tactics by the other side, I remember vividly.
Nice guy, great football player, not qualified for the Supreme Court.
They never used the word dumb jock, they never used the word dumb black jock, but that was basically the tenor of it.
I have tried arbitrations. I've tried administrative hearings.
And I remember watching an interview. He was asked basically, what are your qualifications to be on the Supreme Court? And he said, I'm honest, I work really hard, I take the job seriously, and I will be fair to people. What more do you want?
Supreme Court race between Alan Page and Assistant Hennepin County Attorney Kevin Johnson was a controversial one. Here are the results from that race. Alan Page getting 63% of the votes. Page becomes the first African-American elected to the Minnesota Supreme Court.
Over the next 22 years, Page became the conscience of the court, often disagreeing with bench majorities on cases involving civil liberties.
Our decisions were better because of Justice Page, whether he joined the majority or the dissent, because when you dissent, you force a majority to deal with perceived weaknesses in their opinion.
So what's unclear about what we said in Jackson?
Great question.
Alan Page is the keeper of the flame when it comes to the Supreme Court of the state of Minnesota. When he wrote an opinion, he told a story. He did like to quote Dr. Seuss. So if you Google Dr. Seuss and Minnesota Supreme Court opinions, there will be multiple references that you can see.
Congratulations, Judge.
Thank you.
Justice.
Page was re-elected to the court 3 times, with record turnouts.
Nobody gets more votes from the citizens of Minnesota for any position than Alan Page. I think he set a record with the greatest number of votes ever received by any candidate for any office.
But it was another election in 2008 where Page may have had his greatest impact. The race between Al Franken and Norm Coleman was the longest Senate seat runoff in American history. It would be decided by Minnesota's court, with Alan Page presiding as acting Chief Justice.
I just had confidence, and Alan's a big part of that. They didn't care how long it took. They wanted to get it right. There's a Minnesota nice, but there's also Minnesota fair, and I felt like we were in good hands.
Alan really led our court and the state of Minnesota through some pretty rough waters. We were committed to reaching a unanimous decision, and with his leadership, we got there.
And a vote for the U.S. Senate that took nearly 8 months to conclude. The Minnesota Supreme Court today unanimously ruled that Al Franken, the former comedian, is the winner of the last open seat in the Senate.
With the addition of Franken, Senate Democrats have a supermajority of 60, the biggest they've had in more than a generation. That means when Democrats are united, Republicans will be powerless to stop them.
The yeas are 60, the nays are 39. H.R. 3590 as amended, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act is passed.
One of the humbling pieces about serving on this court is the notion that what you say will be looked at by somebody hundreds of years from now, and not just in a casual way. Cases that I've already been involved with will live on. That's a little scary, actually.
As the summer of 2015 ended, so too did Page's time on the court. The mandatory retirement age of 70 meant that it was time to pack up and step down.
It's probably a good thing for my growth and development to have to move on. There is nothing that I've experienced that is like this work. Am I going to miss it? Dearly. But I think the time has come. It's time to go.
Coming up.
That was back in the days when it was 2 days every day, right?
2 days, no water anywhere in sight.
The Geller horn will be sounded moments before kickoff by Minnesota Vikings Ring of Honor member, Hall of Famer, Purple People Eater, and recently retired Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court, Alan Page.
Today, Alan Page is comfortable making music on his street corner, or on the field of the franchise which gave him an unceremonious release. It was a long road to reconciliation, and it began in Page's hometown.
Well, the Pro Football Hall of Fame has 4 new members this morning. Fred Biletnikoff, Mike Ditka, Jack Ham, and Alan Page were elected to the Hall on Tuesday.
I was 6 years away from football. Being recognized for my past accomplishments simply wasn't enough. Diane and I sat down and talked about how we could make this meaningful for me.
Well, Alan, what's important to you? And he said, well, education is important to me because that's what my parents stressed.
Page became the first and only person to have built and been inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And while the likes of Joe Paterno and Al Davis introduced his fellow inductees, Page broke new ground. For the first time, an African-American woman was a presenter in Canton.
Page picked Willering Beasley, a high school principal from his adopted home, Minneapolis.
Alan warns, don't major in football.
He was courageous to ask me to do it since I was non-traditional. His focus was on education, and that's what he wanted to stress, the importance of helping students to move forward, and that's exactly the same goal that I had.
We are at a point in our history where black teenagers constitute the most unemployed and undervalued people in our society. They can still hear the people with the Steelers construction hats with the beer cans on top and the tube from the beer can to the mouth saying, "Lighten up, Page."
Alan Page, who's always been civic-minded, plans to use the publicity surrounding his Hall of Fame induction to further the funding of minority education. Page announced the formation of the Alan Page Education Foundation today at the Metrodome. The foundation, which plans to give small college scholarships to minority students, will get a big boost from the Vikings.
Does it appear that Allen and the Bikes are patching up some of those ill feelings? I hope so. I hope so. Thanks, RJ.
We're 27 years into it. We have over 6,000 Page scholars and hundreds of thousands of little kids who have been mentored by our scholars.
Congratulations. Good to see you.
Hey, sweetie.
Sometimes you have foundations where they just have one event and the kids are trotted out and they get their scholarships, and that's not how this feels. I think he feels that these are his kids.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Like the bow tie.
Wowzer, wowzer.
Wowzers is right.
For minority students, the Page Education Foundation is a path to a better future. For Page, it helped heal wounds of the past.
We began the Page Education Foundation, and the Vikings were very supportive of that. They did a pass the hat at the game where I got my ring. Through their efforts, we started off the foundation with $100,000 in the bank. You have to move on. You can't spend your life being angry.
When Page was 22, Vikings training camp meant lights out at 11. Now, at 70, it's the happiest place on earth when he's there.
My grandchildren get a chance to experience in some kind of way a little bit of what my life was back then.
You see 5? I don't see 5. Where is number 5?
Over there?
Number 5 is an important player. Why? Because number 5 is the quarterback. Do you know what the quarterback does? People call the quarterback the leader of the team.
Some people do.
Some people do. They have a lot of
Not all people.
responsibility.
What's your name?
Otis.
Otis? And what's your name?
Theo.
Theo? Oh, I'm a Theo also.
If you are willing to seek excellence, you can not only get to the Super Bowl, you're a group of young people that have the ability to win it.
Vikings on 3.
1, 2, 3. Vikings! All right. Good job.
Soon there will be cars to drive and books to write. Spring will come again.
Is that actually sap?
That's what sap looks like.
Is it water?
That's what it looks like.
But it's water?
No, it's sap.
It's really actually sap?
It's really actually sap. I tend not to be a person who looks in the rearview mirror.
I'm asking you.
I find value in the moment and the experience that I'm going through at the time.
Alan Page has always chosen growth. He pursues the future the way he once did quarterbacks. But right now, what's important is here. Tomorrow can wait. And the past will find its place.